IVM.
Close your eyes for a moment and imagine. What would you be doing today had it not been for your day-to-day responsibilities of meeting work deadlines and making sure your family is financially secured? Would you have been a footballer, kicking the ball around on those grassy grounds? Or would you have been an artist, sitting near a window overlooking the hills as you paint away? Maybe you crave to be a photographer. But here you are, framing a picture of the life you wish you had. But this can still be a reality. करो पूरे अपने इरादे, अपनों से किए सभी वादे. SBI Life अपने लिए, अपनों के लिए. To know more about our insurance plans with wealth creation, log on to www.sbilife.co.in. IRDAI registration number 111.
We are actually, sometimes I tell my team, we are in the culture business actually. We are not in a streaming business, we are in the culture business, and the business of culture actually. And that's true because if you look at, I think at the core level, I think music defines us. I mean, and I would also now say that podcast defines us because that's itself a very, very strong addition to what Spotify does worldwide. And I think if you go deep, I think the moods, whether we are in a romantic mood or whether we are sad, there are music which basically there to soothe us or actually, accentuate that feeling even more. If you have any kind of moments, I mean, festivals, there are songs or, content available for that particular time. If you look at, so I think the way we have food in this country, which is different, I mean, go from, as you start traveling outside of, your own place, wherever you are, and you start every maybe 100, 200 kilometers, you see different cuisines happening. The same way the music also in this country kind of changes.
Hello and welcome to the Filter Koffee Podcast. The story of Spotify's growth in India over the last 3 years is absolutely legendary. Not only has the platform managed an audience growth at exponential speeds, but it has also captured the imagination of a generation that has taken to audio. Today, Spotify is as much a cultural icon in India as it is a market leader. And one of the main reasons for this is the very localized way in which the platform has grown in India, much different from how it did in many other countries. Whether it is in leveraging the creative community here of artists and podcasters, or in adapting itself to the uniqueness of the Indian music industry, Spotify's approach in India has been much, much different than any of the other global platforms which have set up shop here. I spoke to the architect of this story, Amarjit Batra, the MD of Spotify India. I've always been a fan of Amar's deep understanding of the Indian digital consumer, and I spoke to him what it takes to culturally localize a global brand like Spotify. I also spoke to him about overcoming the unique challenges of the Indian music industry, building Spotify into a cult brand, and the kind of organizational structure he needed to build to achieve all of this. Stay with us. We'll be right back on the Filter Koffee Podcast.
Hey everybody, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On the Filter Koffee Podcast, Karthik speaks to 3 independent filmmakers, Guneet Monga, Sophia Paul, and Ashwin Iyer Tiwari. They dive into a conversation that is full of anecdotes, different visions, and films. Our new show, Voices for Water, hosted by Karthik Nagarajan, discusses India's Great Water Challenge. It examines the current state of availability of water in India and how we as citizens can do our bit to tackle this challenge. On the Paisa Vesta podcast, Anupam is joined by Binal Gandhi and Sonira Sangvi, co-authors of Piggy Bank to Portfolio, How to Raise Financially Smart Kids. They talk about the reason behind writing this book and their research findings with more than 500 parents. On the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast, Ashwin and DJ talk about the untimely demise of cricket legend Shane Warne. They also cover the India vs Sri Lanka series. On the Life Manifesto, Serena highlights things she wishes that we were taught when we were younger, especially for women. And on All Things Policy, Megha talks to Arjun to discuss the recent tests conducted by the DRDO and how militaries around the world are embracing quantum. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you enjoyed this show or any of our shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. Word of mouth really does help us. And also, please, a rating if you could. That is also extremely helpful to us. And remember, we're also on YouTube. You can check out ivmpodcast.com/YouTube to get a list of the different channels that we operate on YouTube. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week, SBI Life Insurance, Bank of Baroda, India Water Portal, and Max Life Insurance. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Welcome to the Filter Coffee Podcast. Amar, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Karthik, for inviting me. I wish we can have this Filter Coffee together soon. but that's great to be with you, man.
This has been one of the chats I've been wanting to have on the show, for the longest time. So extremely excited about all the things that we will be discussing. I think in a way it sort of worked out also because these last 2 years has been amazing from a Spotify perspective. So richer stories and greater achievements, I guess, that we can talk about.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
But, how was the last, 2020, 21, both personally as well as for Spotify?
2021, in fact, last year as well as the year before that, I think have been very different for all of us. I think we have seen some challenges we never anticipated. So I think I have a favorite saying, which I talk to everybody now about, is that we used to talk about plan A's and plan B's. Now I think it's sometimes you plan C and plan D's now. Because whatever you think about doing, sometimes most of the time it doesn't go as per plan. But I think it's also been a year where I think in spite of the challenges that we've seen, and for Spotify, we just 3 years into this market officially in a way, it's been a roller coaster ride where we have seen that while we had a fantastic run, but we've had obstacles and roadblocks all over, things we never anticipated would happen. So in a way, to come out of this and to be in a good shape, I think it's a lot of gratitude out there, but it's a lot of learning. And I think it's just making us ready to go ahead. And on a personal front, I think it's been a big change, I think, to work virtually for a long time. I think for all of us, in some ways, it's got more efficient maybe, but it also got a bit impersonal. I think the energy that you drive from meeting people face to face and working like a team, and across moving out and so on. I think to some extent, I think you can't replace that. I think let's admit that. But on the other hand, I think we have had positives that we are in businesses in which sometimes in such challenges, we are able to continue to work very well. That itself is a very, very good place to be. So a mixed bag, but overall, I think very happy where we are. And I think looking forward ahead. Yeah.
Personally, Amar, what anything that is this pandemic has changed you for the better or worse in any one aspect that has been significantly changed in these last 2 years for you?
I think many, because one is that I think I've realized the importance of exercising because I think we have gone even more sedentary. If you look at, I think, like we're chatting now, we are sitting down, and all through the day, I think some of us have, continuous meetings all across. So I think to switch off as well as to exercise, I think it's a huge, huge need, I think. And I think it's helped me become more balanced. Though I'm working from home for some time now, I think I'm able to switch off when I want to, which people think it's difficult. But in the evenings, you can do that. You can do a little bit on the weekends. But there are times you want to switch off. I think that's something which is very, very critical to do. And the second is, I think I've found that the need to exercise, to get back, to get the system moving is extremely critical. So I think these two things have stood out for me. And lastly, I think I'm a big believer in audio because we are building an audio business. I think audio is becoming such an important part of tuning yourself in, and concentrating as well as relaxing. I think it's just becoming so powerful because after being on screens all the time, I think it's becoming really, really difficult to go back and continuously use screens. So I'm so happy that, we are part of the companies which are kind of trying to build the audio revolution in a way because it's so much important for our sanity as well as our balance, that we need today in our lives. Yeah.
As always, I love how you put it. It's very beautiful. Congratulations on the third birthday of Spotify India. And I think you're close to having spent, 4 years in the organization. To me, the fact that, just in 3 years, Spotify has become a market leader in many of the segments. It's just such a dream run. How does it feel from your vantage point?
Yeah, it definitely feels great. I think when you achieve something, it looks good on that side. But when we started off, I think a lot of people told us that I think we're too late in the market. There are 8, 9 players in the market. Everybody's already has what you do, and so on and so on. So I think it's the number one piece is that how you looked at it from that time and how you look at it from here. I think it's 3 years, but it's just kind of fundamentally exactly happened the way we, personally, at least I had thought. And the reason I can tell you why, because in a way, when we came in, we didn't have the first mover advantage, which Spotify had globally, because Spotify launched in around 2008. Globally, it's been like the pioneering audio music streaming service. Now we have about 400 million people. So in India, we didn't have that luxury. We came, when everybody had, already done some work out there. So then I think then I looked at what could be the advantage that we have. And I think we had the advantage of a last mover advantage. And that also is an advantage, because then you basically sit across and see, okay, what has happened so far in this country? And what have people done? And I think that time, though I don't come from a hardcore music industry, I was doing classifieds and e-commerce before that. I think one thing that I saw very clearly is that we are still, scraping the surface of the potential of India. The listening habits that I saw from people was people are not really clued on to streaming. They were flirting with it a bit, but they were not clued on as much. Podcasts had not even emerged on the scene in a big way, though there were pretty good podcasts available, like probably yours. But I think it was not really big. So in a way, I think we saw that there is a lot of work to be needed. And luckily, the mindset that we used was a blue ocean, that there is a work to be done. And that actually has led us to be where we are, because we have then focused from there to bring things, what people didn't experience before, or let's say brought communications or product features or localizations and thought processes which people had not seen before. And of course, we had the advantage that we used to do some of this thing globally, but we also went around and localized that for the India market, and that seems to have worked. And I'm really, really happy that the team and together we've been able to cross through this first hurdle very well by being here and being relevant in the market. Yeah.
No, I think you sort of touched it in a very, as you always are, in a very modest manner. But as someone who's been looking at different platforms take root in India, right? Whether it is the largest social media platforms coming here or the video streaming platforms coming here, I've always seen those organizations have a very great growth, no doubt. But they've always been like just an Indian version of a global product. But when I see the way Spotify has grown in India, the localization that you spoke about has been so fundamental to the growth story itself. Right? I think the India story of Spotify, to me, as an outsider at least, seems very uniquely different from what I've seen or from the platform in other parts of the world. Right? Can you double click a little bit on that journey, the localizing journey?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think one of the things that I think I can talk more about that is the way Spotify also enters market globally. And then the second part could be how we entered India or how we built for India. I think that's two distinct aspects. And I think because we are talking of global companies, performing in India, being successful or relatively successful. So these are two combinations that I see very clearly. So at the first level, what Spotify does very well, which I actually am very, very pleased with, is that the vision of the founder, which is Daniel, I think, they have a perspective that they're not in a hurry, like they want to really, really go out and go into every market. So if you've seen, India was probably the 79th market, where we entered. So yeah, it's like, can you believe it? Today we are in today we are in 180 plus markets, 184 markets, but India was the 79th in 2019, February 26th. And so we were doing a lot of work before that. I think we were slightly delayed, of course. But we were doing a lot of work before that. And I think the way Spotify enters market is that Spotify kind of looks at, building local nuances or getting the local understanding and the local insights and researches and so on, plus building the product focus wherever they can. In some markets, obviously it's a little bit of switch on things, but smaller market, but markets like India, more strategic in nature, there are a lot of work they typically go into. So that is the number one, is how Spotify looks at it, I think. And the second piece within that is that they prefer generally to go with looking at building local teams. So sometimes global companies go wrong is that they believe that, oh, this person is great, he's sitting in US, let's bring him to India or him or her to India, and let's make them kind of a, it's not an easy market to understand. So that I think is the number one. Number two piece, the way Spotify did right was they said, okay, we want to do India, we want to do it well. We need to build an India local team and local expertise. And I think that's where people like me come in. I mean, myself and maybe other people around the team who basically started building Spotify. We came with local expertise. We came with local understanding. So that helped. The second piece, what is about is how Spotify looked at India. And I think that's where, some of our team members start coming in. I also come in at that stage. And there we realize that this is not a market which you can just copy paste some of the thought process that we have for any other market. For example, Spotify generally goes into a market where there's one local language or two local languages, any place in the world. This is a market where 22 official languages, like typically, and so many other dialects and so on. Then if you look at the, artist or consumption behavior, everywhere it's artist-driven market. Here it is film-driven market. That's completely different. Everywhere it is like a combination, or mostly I think it's a combination of partially iOS, Android, but maybe other ways to listen to music. Here it's mostly mobile, that to Android and so on. So such instances, if you take, there are so many of them, I'm just giving you a glimpse, you start thinking India is very different. So then what do you do? So then I think the way Spotify looked at India from that perspective is to go and say, okay, if it is film-driven market, how do we cater to film? So we create starring, maybe a Shah Rukh Khan, starring, Amitabh Bachchan playlist. What do you do with curation of languages? So there's so many languages. Can we curate all of them immediately? Let's pick up the 4 or 5 main key languages and we start making playlists in those languages and so on and so on. How do we onboard people out there? Do we straight away bring them to the way we do it globally, or do we kind of create a bit more understanding on how you can select your local artists and so on? So these kind of things started off, and I think to some extent, the credit should go to the global teams as well as the local teams who started working on it. I was part of that, and I think building that whole foundation of how do you want to kind of operate in India. And then after that, I think it's all off about that we are not here as a global. We are a global company, but we are not here as a global company. We are here to serve the local country here. We need to start behaving like local. So I think luckily all of us are passionate about music. All of us are passionate about India as such, and we have a pretty good understanding of the Indian market. So then we started building from all aspects of our business. We started building from the local. And I think so I'm glad you mentioned that from outside you see that we are building from local. I think that's the way it should be done. And I'm glad that we did a lot of it right there. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I'm quite sure there are rooms of improvement, but good starting point, maybe.
I've been observing, your career for a while now, and you always seem to find the pulse of the market that you're working on, right? At a very first principle level, right? You understand the audience or a customer at a very primal level, and then sort of build, the solution around it. In this localizing journey, right, for Spotify, was there any aspect of the Indian market that surprised you, that your own hypothesis was different, and then you sort of went like, oh wow, okay, so this is how things are? Any instances of something like that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I think I'm quite sure there are many. Let me quickly think of some of them which kind of fits in. So I think the area where if you look at the consumption within the country, I mean, our typical hypothesis is that Spotify does very well in international language. And if you look at it, where we started off, it actually picked up very well. In the first month only, we had about 2 million, listeners actually join in. A lot of them were using via VPN before that and so on. We don't share our exact numbers here, but those are the numbers we shared. That's why I'm sharing here. And a lot of them were listening to, international music and English music. And what surprised me was that as I looked deeper into the market, I found that the market is much, much more local in India than typically what we are. And that kind of surprised me. But then I also dug deeper into that and I realized that it's even different as you go from, let's say, from a streaming platform, or if you look at offline, and if you go to other platforms like YouTube and so on, it's even more different. So I think one thing that we corrected ourselves very early was that how do you want to operate in the market. And I think that comes back to the first question you asked, how are you thinking local? Because if we had not thought about this question earlier in the beginning, and that's as early as 1 year before before we actually launched, we would not have got it right, because we realized that there's no point communicating about English music, because that's great, Spotify's strength. So a natural tendency would to talk about international music strength and so on, but we will not go anywhere with that. And I think that's a very difficult choice to do, because it's your sweet spot. It's like, the cricketer who hits his best stroke and it's a cover drive, and you say, okay, no, I'm not going to play cover drive here. I'm going to square cut, or I'm going to do a hook or whatever, because you have to go outside your comfort zone and pick up the areas which you are not yet kind of a good with. And that was the biggest hypothesis I think we built up in the beginning of our journey, where we said that if we want to do justice to a country like India, we need to build the local music thought process much, much earlier. And that should be our core level of focus. And if you look at one of the reasons we have succeeded here, if you look back, I think, and you go deep into it, you'll realize that that is exactly the reason we succeeded, because we built the local languages, which is the top 4 or 5 languages. And I can quickly share with you and for everybody who's listening, is that because it's a very interesting one. So if you look at 22 languages in this country, officially, I think the 4 languages actually dominate the overall consumption. Now, of course, there are many of them, but Hindi, Punjabi, and Telugu and Tamil, these are top languages which basically have really, really stood out in terms of consumption over the last few years, and it still is. And they're really, really big compared to the rest of the languages. And I'm talking only streaming at this stage. I'm not getting into the overall base. Maybe there are a lot of people who are using piracy today, or maybe other means out there. I'm talking of streaming only. And this is not changing a bit. I think there are great languages which came up now. I think they're fantastic. Malayalam and Kannada and Marathi and Odia and Bhojpuri, Haryanvi, Bengali. Amazing languages. And they're all coming up strongly, but they don't occupy that big share. So we focused on the first 4 or 5 languages, and we went very deep into them. And we curated, if you pick up any press release from the 3 years back, we said we are curating in these 4 languages deeply. Now we are curating in many more languages, but we started with that. We went about communicating with our audiences in those languages and so on. So that, I think, is fundamentally shifted the focus, in terms of going deeper in these languages, which resulted in correcting our hypothesis initially that, okay, we can go and do very well with English only, which would normally happen in many markets still, where we have 2 languages. One is English, one is the local language. Yeah. So that I would say, maybe a very long answer, Karthik, but I think this is a critical one.
It's fascinating. As you were talking about this, I was just thinking that for Spotify to not use its strength, which is the global music library, it's like, how Sachin hit the double century in Sydney, where he didn't play the cover drive at all throughout. Absolutely. And then you use the same analogy. But as you were saying this, I was just reflecting back, Amaran, because, for many years before Spotify launched, right, whenever I was in a London tube or in the New York subway station, I'll see these advertisements of Spotify, and it always had a very global feel. And now that I think about it, if I look at my own journey with Spotify as a consumer in India, it never felt like a Firangi platform, so to say. It didn't feel foreign at all or global at all to me, right? Well, of course, it had the premium of it with features. All the communication that I remember were very, very localized. I felt like it was talking to me and the people from this part of the world. So I think that's a very powerful sort of a decision, and a lot of restraint it must have taken to sort of go that way. Right?
It is.
Just as an extension of that, right? I think winning in India also in every industry means playing by a different set of rules, right? From a policy perspective to a competition perspective to a partner perspective. I think one of the things I've also sort of observed is that, in this localized way of growing in India and growing so quickly, so fast, Spotify has also significantly reshaped the dynamics of the Indian music industry, right, in the last couple of years. Right? Can you talk to us a little bit about that journey?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for saying that we have changed the dynamics, but I don't think we have. To be honest, I think we are working on a lot of things right now. I think that I can share with you few aspects of that, I think, and that kind of talks about the nature of our market today and where we should be going. And I think it's very critical for us. So if you look at, if you look at the music industry today, I think the biggest, and I mentioned these languages, except maybe Punjabi, all the other languages are film dominated. Okay, Punjabi is the only exception there, and that's an interesting piece altogether. And if you go back, I think there's very interesting numbers. Somebody had, when film songs used to be made, there used to be about 10 film songs on an average in a film, and today it is about 3 to 4. Okay, and if you look at it today, a lot of them are still remixes and so on. So if you look at the success of an artist in this country, it used to be decided by their entry into film music in the end of it. Because if you're not into film music, you're not succeeding. So if you look at some of the, look at Bengali music. I think there's some amazing singers who have come from Bengali, but they all sing for Hindi. I mean, look at Kishore Kumar and look at some of these Bollywood best of the singers. So I think somewhere down the line that that whole that potential talent in this country got down to this pyramid on the top, where if you don't reach the film music, you don't succeed. I think because of that reason, I think my feeling, and I'm not entirely there, it's my hypothesis, and I think to some extent could be true also, we haven't lived up to our potential where, a country of our size, why isn't our music as popular as maybe a Korean music or even English music or any other music around the world? In India, yes, we are popular, we listen to our music, but why isn't popular? I think because of that, there's so much amazing talent could not actually express themselves in a big way. And I think that piece fundamentally is what stifled the growth of so many artists. Of course, if you dive deeper, I think, Karthik, we all know, if you look at India from the past, I think singing in music, people singing out there was not considered as a big profession. Okay, and people were discouraged to sing. I mean, I know so many great artists' dreams dies at the time where parents say, go and do something and, work and so on, and you don't follow your passion. To some extent, these are things which are linked together, because if they can't becoming popular, if everybody has to sing in Bollywood or some singing maybe film music, then I think it's difficult because only few people are able to do that, reach there. So that fundamental kind of a music industry dynamics in the past is changing now. And we've that's the second part, I would say. So like I said, last mover advantage, I think if we had come maybe 8-10 years earlier in India, I don't think we would have fundamentally changed that. We would have accelerated that for sure, but we could not have timed it. So by our entry in also a little late, there was already this shift happening. If you look at the Punjabi music, the way it has developed, or if you look at the hip-hop scene that is developing overall for the last 5, 7, 8 years or so on, and if you look at the way Indian indie music started to come up, in a way independent music, singers are coming across the board, I think there was this flash of stuff happening, because as Bollywood or film music was getting constrained with the amount of songs they can produce, a lot of artists, because of social media and other ways, were able to find avenues, go outside of that. I think Spotify's entry 3 years back, and now what we have done in the last 3 years has just accelerated that particular piece. And we believe that there is about culture, that we are not going here to change the film music. No, film music is something which is great. I love personally film music, all this thing. But the question is that it should not be the entirely where every artist has to depend on that. And that, I think, we have created this next piece, which is a non-film music piece, to some extent that is much more closer to everybody's heart, because that is truly where the artist is represented. The artist is singing. The artist is up there. The artist is getting promoted. I think that is really, really what we love doing at Spotify. We are also focusing on film music in a big way. Our last marketing campaign, Dil Filmi, to Suno Filmi, was targeted towards that. So we are trying to create a balance there, because the future is, I believe, the area of independent music, where we are going ahead and making sure that we support these artists in the best way possible, help them understand Spotify. We do master classes on Spotify where almost 6,000 artists have actually been exposed to the Spotify for Artists, and they know how to use the platform better. We are helping take artists outside of India, and some artists have been on Times Square,
Yeah.
some on Toronto billboards. And I think they are not necessarily, some of them are upcoming singers like Abhilasha and all that, who are Radar India singers, which is an upcoming artist program that we run today. So I'll probably stop here, but I think there's a lot of work happening, and we can dive deeper into this. But this is an area where we are passionate about, and we believe that the future of growth will be in this area, and not only future of growth from India perspective, but where Indian artists will actually break outside of India, which will be the true win for Spotify India team. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And I think, I often think about this as to how did we get here from a music perspective. I guess for whatever reason it was, the way our radio, was designed over many decades, right? It was always ended up being very centered towards film music, and completely stifled the discoverability of anything else. And even though there were a lot of players in this space before you, I feel none of them really addressed the discoverability piece really well, right? And I think that's why I feel Spotify is as much a cultural force as well as it is an audio and a musical force, because I feel more people today are able to, artists or even otherwise, they're able to express themselves, through a platform like Spotify, right? And how do you sort of look at that, like Spotify as a cultural icon brand in India of today?
We are actually. Sometimes I tell my team we are in the culture business. Actually, we are not in a streaming business. We are in the culture business,
Yes.
and the business of culture actually. And that's true, because if you look at, I think at the core level, I think music defines us. I mean, and I would also now say that podcast defines us, because that's itself a very, very strong addition to what Spotify does worldwide. And I think if you go deep, I think the moods, whether we are in a romantic mood or whether we are sad, there are music which basically there to soothe us, or actually, accentuate that feeling even more. If you have any kind of moments, I mean, festivals, there are songs or, content available for that particular time. If you look at, so I think the way we have food in this country, which is different. I mean, go from, as you start traveling outside of, your own place, wherever you are, and you start every maybe 100, 200 kilometers, you see different cuisines happening. The same way the music also in this country kind of changes this thing. And I think that shows the richness in our culture, and that shows the diversity in the culture. And in some areas we get united, because of course, if it's about love songs, then everybody has love songs. If it's about patriotic songs, then every language would have patriotic songs, and so on and so on. So we get united in our own way, in the way we speak and the way we connect. But I think the cultural part of this country is so deep that I think that's why, we obviously proudly say that India probably has the richest heritage around the world, the depth of culture that we have. I think at Spotify, little again, like 3 years is very early, I would say. I mean, we're glad what we have done out there, but we would be fooling ourselves if we say we have done a lot, because there's so much to do. And I think we are happy that the work that we did in 3 years is being recognized by listeners, or being loved by listeners, or loved by our artists and creators who are with us. But what the message we want to send them out there is that we are here to do more. And I think we are here to do more. We are here to work closely with them, and to understand their tastes better, to help them succeed more, and so on and so on. Because we are still, I think, at a stage where, if you look, and I'll give you numbers perspective so that we understand that where we are going. Out of a population of 1.4 billion or 1.3 billion, we are about 600 million people approximately on the internet. And the streaming, base of users would be about 100 to 150 still. I mean, and it keeps fluctuating. So I would say the serious users would still be about 100 million. There are a lot of people who flirt with streaming, come and go, but serious users would be 100 million something now. So I think we have within the existing system only, anybody who has a smartphone, anybody who has internet access, this is culture. So I think they should be consuming music. They should be consuming audio. So in a way, we have a huge task in front of us. That's why when people talk to us about competition and so on, we said that our biggest competition is about, helping piracy maybe, or people who don't know such an amazing platform exists, for them to kind of get their time spent better rather than whiling away or like say commuting and then staring at a screen, or like walking and then maybe enjoying the music to they're missing out on such amazing moments. They should participate in that. So culturally, I think we want to connect the behaviors of people who don't listen to music today. Primarily, that's a much larger segment, or who listen to music in an inferior way, whether it's a piracy or whether it is a any other inferior way to listen to music, to bring them to a better way to listen to music and to get more integrated into their own languages and their own culture, and basically not only listen and participate. I think one of the things which Spotify does very well is to co-create, and this is a very interesting part, because when we go back, and I think this is something which let me touch on that a little bit, because when we came in, we realized that what do we communicate to our people? Our platform has been known for being personalized, great in personalization and recommendation, but I can't tell somebody who's a non-user what personalization is. Like you can only experience it. So what is it that we go down to and communicate with people? And we realize that I think if you look at the music, and this is about where the consumer understanding comes in. I think you mentioned about that in the beginning. I'm not saying I'm an expert there, but I'm curious. And we keep our eyes open and ears open to understand what users are saying and thinking. And we realize that people don't listen to one song now. If you're looking to it, you used to buy CDs, you used to listen to multiple songs. Of course, there were a few of your favorites. But today, when you start listening to it, you are listening to a playlist. And that was the biggest strength which Spotify has. So if you look at our first campaign, that there is a playlist for that, which was probably the only English campaign that we did. Rest of them have all been in local languages. Was basically designed to kind of look at this consumer behavior and match it with the strength of Spotify. That there is a playlist for everything. And we created from our side, our editors create playlists. We have now created hundreds of playlists which in different languages out there. Algorithmically, we create playlists. If you start listening to Spotify, we'll start recommending a pretty good playlist to you based on your behaviors and so on. But the co-creation part, which I mentioned, is about when our listeners start creating playlists. And that, I think, is the biggest. Sometimes I actually go down, if I have to pick up a new area, I go back and listen to a user playlist, because I sometimes enjoy them also a lot, because other than my own editors, what they create, because that allows me to understand, say some expert sitting out there who likes this particular music, and they have created as good a playlist what our editors can create. So that I think, or I can ever create. So that kind of allows me to consume. And that way we have 4 billion such playlists globally. Wow. So then you can imagine that for every mood and every moment, you can find a playlist out there today. And we can test it out, by the way. And we did that campaign signaling that there's a playlist for that. And we realized that, yes, there is a playlist for example, during the COVID time, the pandemic time, there were people who were creating playlists on household stuff like Bartan and the Jhadu. People who are working at home say, let's get a playlist for that. So people have playlists for walking. So I think there are some very interesting stuff, and that co-creation is actually culture. Because we are today seeing a moments in our lives, and we are connecting that with the music that we listen to, either now in music or with podcasts, because on podcasts also you can create playlists today. So that piece of creating all that interesting playlist on Spotify is something that we love. And interestingly, last year we had about, if you've seen the data, we see about 150,000 playlists were being made by our users, our listeners every day.
Wow!
Which just puts us in one of the top 10, 20 markets in the world for us. And that is the power. That when we started off, that was not a behavior that Indian listeners were showing. But now we are moving towards that. I think so exciting times ahead in terms of culture, in terms of how people are, engaging with music, and then how they are also sharing music, like on social media and with their friends and families and so on.
That was amazing. In fact, as you were saying, India is the 79th market in which Spotify was entering. I was just yesterday, I think, reading Gustav's press release on how it is one of the most engaged markets globally, for Spotify. And I love, how you describe the whole playlist creation thing, right? Like for me, I think playlist is one of the greatest ways by which one can express yourself, right? And I remember I had taken a few days off in Dharamshala, and this lovely place that I was staying in. And the first thing I did was to create a playlist for that vibe. so that others can sort of enjoy that as well. We're speaking a lot, Amar, about uh, becoming a culture like and getting into that psyche of people, etc. But that is going to be possible only with the right kind of a team at Spotify to sort of build this out, right? People who internalize, what we're talking about, and people who bring in not just the skill sets but also the share the vision, right, that you have for Spotify India. Talk to us a little bit about building Team India and the organizational culture that you've built over these 4 years.
Yeah, no, that's now you are touching another passion point for me outside of the understanding India, learning about it. So I'm a huge believer in teamwork. I mean that though I mean if I look back on some of the stuff that I did in the past, I like playing sports. So I ended up playing team sports and individual sports, and I learned from both. But I've kind of looked at that a good team can really, if worked well, can actually do create extraordinary stuff. And it happens in sports all the time, in businesses also. So I think somewhere down the line, I think when we started building the team in India, this was one of the things on our mind, that how do you build, because we are here for this journey. I think when I first met the Spotify leadership and Daniel, I think they were all looking at being in India for long term. They said, we have the patience. We are here. We are looking at India as an investment market. And that's what was extremely critical. So you need to build a team that kind of thinks long term, because a lot of times when we go out there, I mean, and today, I mean, if you check it out, I mean, must be hiring people. A lot of times, many of us have actually had 1 year stints, and we quickly move from one organization to another. So I think you don't build amazing passion, and you don't get to do amazing stuff in 1 year. I mean, you have to be a super guy to do that. So at Spotify, luckily, there's a very nice culture already. I mean, which I think came to an advantage. I think our values, that Spotify values that we have globally, I think are pretty interesting and strong in it. So in the way it's built, for example, we have values like being passionate. I mean, everybody who joins Spotify, I think they come with this thing that I love music. I love this thing. And then that's like, and if you look at the people in India team today, there are, I think, at least 5 or 6 people who are amazing singers. And some of them actually perform still today, in the free time. And maybe they have albums today also. So in a way, that's a kind of a passion, like we have in the team. If you look at the other strength is about being collaborative. Collaboration is actually such a strong trait at Spotify. And when I joined Spotify 4 years back, maybe a few years before, I had heard that about the product team about Spotify. And I think that when I was building an organization, in my previous company, and I was building a product and tech organization also, along with everything else, we try to copy what is the strongest, product team in the world. And we looked at everywhere else, and we found at Spotify that the way they actually had designed their product culture, the squads and the tribe, there's a pretty in-depth, if you search for Google, you'll find some very interesting articles on the agile culture, the way Spotify engineering team works and so on. So that is a very collaborative mindset. And I think that basically works across Spotify very well. It's a very strong value. The third area is being sincere. It is about how do you kind of work sincerely with each other and keep the politics apart and so on. That works very well with collaboration. And then it's a lot about actually having fun, because we are here in the industry where, we want to make sure that we are having fun ourselves and enjoying and working closely with our stakeholders, artists and so on, to have fun. So those are global values. And I think the space Spotify looks at it, it's about, we think of ourselves as a band. And that band culture, I mean, whenever somebody joins Spotify, we generally say, welcome to the band, because we are, a band which is working together and, towards making sure that we build an amazing team and amazing culture across the world. And there, I think the strongest thing that Spotify talks about is ownership. And I think that they want to give people autonomy. They want to get people to do their own stuff. So, I think the average age of Spotify is 30, 35 or 34 or something, globally, I'm saying. And there are a lot of people who are very young, but there are lots of, empowerment for them, which I think is great, because some of these people who come in, they have some diverse, and Spotify really believes in diversity and inclusion and so on. So we bring people from different parts of the world and so on, and they end up supporting us out there. So there's a lot about that. And I think life at Spotify that way is great. Talking about India, so I think those, luckily we have a foundation of, like great values and great culture, which we had. Then you looked at, okay, how do you build India? I think somewhere, I strongly believe that values is nothing but somewhere it starts from also the people who start working. It's about everybody's values. Probably, if I came in early and I'm the leader, maybe some of my values would kind of fit in with it, and so on and so on. So I think we looked at, if we want to do well in India, there are a few other mantras, I would say, rather than, which kind of helps us. So we have been looking at some of them. You can't work in India if you can't think big. Like you have to think big. You cannot think too small because there's so many things out there. You have to think unconventional. You have to think, we have to be fast. You have to look at a continuous improvement, or you have to kind of continuously learn. So there are certain things that you build as a part of the culture, and you should not be afraid to fail at all, because build a culture where let people fail and let them kind of learn from that, and so on and so on. So we have built our own small, you can call it mantras, or, more like tenets out there that we build on that. In nutshell, I think I would put them as entrepreneurial traits, because if you look at entrepreneurial traits, it's all about some of these things. So combined with the strong values that we have globally as a part of our culture, looking at India, where we are starting off quite late, small market today in terms of overall streaming, but very large market potentially going out there. So how do we build that culture? And I think that's been my primary goal personally for the last, few years, that build a good team. And I'm very happy that as a team, we are coming together. And the work that you see, across the board, I think we don't focus on one thing. So it's not about only communicating maybe good campaigns. It's not about only working with good partnerships, or it's not about only working with artists in a good way. I think everything that you do, I think you kind of look at continuously improving. And like a good sportsman, you cannot have a one good shot to win the tournament, or like a bodybuilder, you can't have one good physique, one good part of your body looking good and the rest of it looking weak. Same way, to build a good organization, each part of your team, each part of that work that you do should start getting better and better. And I think you should excel from all angles. And there's no hurry. I mean, you can obviously be not good on day one on everything, but the culture should be that you kind of keep working on that, and do things which are generally go and do things which nobody else generally has done. Because if you are a pioneer brand, and if you're in a market where you are the first ones to do something, you will not have a situation where you can copy from people all the time. Copying is easy, but then copying will make you do whatever everybody else do. You should copy. I think there's no harm in copying, but you should also develop new things. And you can only develop new things when you think of yourself from an angle of a pioneering mindset, which Spotify has been building this since the time they came in the market, 2008 and so on. Yeah.
Beautifully put. I love how passionately you think of this angle. And more than anything else, I love that, band analogy. I think everything that you spoke about metaphorically can be encapsulated into that welcome to the band sort of a sentence, isn't it? This is fabulous. Just taking a slightly broader view, Amar, I've always felt personally that, India is a very audio first country inherently, right? Because the way, I'm a 90s child, so I've listened to people talking on radio ads, radio shows, etc. And if you look at our mythology, the way we've always been, oral storytellers to villages, to families, to everything. And even today, when you cut to it, the long traffic jams that we have, the huge mobile penetration that we have, all of them point us to being an audio first sort of a country. But somewhere I think that promise so far until now has not really been realized, right? At least in a big way. I think the last 2 years and the kind of success you have driven at Spotify gives someone like me a lot of hope, someone like me who is very passionate about audio per se. But how do you see the next 3 years or the next 3 or 5 years for India in terms of her audio journey? What do you think are some of the elements of the future of audio for India?
Yeah. No, it's always good to talk to someone who's a believer in audio himself. So I think thanks for that. I think we are actually lucky to be, working on a medium that is not about, I think it looks not as big today compared to what other social media and media video should be. But I think if you look at the historical, from history purposes, or from, like look back to the ancestors and so on, audio is the way we have learned stories. I mean, if you look at today, I mean, how have good stories passed from generations to generations? It has been narrated by people, out there, from, parents to their kids, and grandparents to their, and so on and so on. So in a way, I think there cannot be a better storytelling medium than audio. And I think as you start listening to music and start listening to podcasts, especially I think nowadays with podcasts, you see that there's a huge connection of which people can have with when they listen to an audio versus go on a video. I've kind of nowadays consume much more podcasts than music, because it's always difficult to maintain a balance. Music is everybody's first love. I think podcast is, of course, slightly much more longer. And I realized that there is no powerful medium than podcast, because it kind of puts you in a zone of imagination. The same, story, when you kind of view it from a video perspective, of course, it's much more enriching, like with those, if you look at I love historical series, whether I watch all these video platforms, and you see all these stories created. It's amazing out there when they show these dresses and they show these fights and so on and so on. But you see that the content out there, sometimes you don't remember. You visually remember a lot of stuff. But when you listen, you're actually imagining all that stuff. And everybody's imagination is different. The way I would remember a war scene from what will be from my side, and the way I would imagine a mountain would be different, or a sunlight different. I think they're kind of it comes from your own personal experiences that you've had. But you remember much more of the story when I listen through podcasts than when I go through video. Especially even names of places, names of people, and so on and so on. So I think audio that way, I think, is very, very, even if you look at some of the studies that have been done, we have a very interesting report that we do globally called a Culture Next report. And we went through and looked at how does the audio, how do people consume? And most of the people, I mean, Gen Zs and millennials, something like 70-80% more, above percentage of people actually said that when they listen to an audio, host, I mean, it looks as if this person is a friend. So that is the connection you're able to make from audio. And so I think I'm very confident that the audio business, especially podcasts, will be really, really huge. Even from music perspective, like I said, we have about 80 million songs today on Spotify globally. About 60,000 songs are uploaded on Spotify every day. So in a way, the amount of content that is creating from music perspective also around the world is huge. And so there's no dearth of amazing stuff that's going to happen in this field. The question comes out that why is it, why people don't consume this sometimes in a big compared to maybe others is a behavioral thing. I think we have also over the years have very seen that there are many interesting things which have come in, the social platforms and the video platforms. So I think there is a natural tendency to be glued to a screen. And it used to be TV earlier, TV versus radio, maybe in the past. Now it is about a video or a platform versus an audio. I think if you look at a country state today as a country, I mean, if we really need to progress, I think we need to have people on the move. And you cannot be on the move if you are glued to a screen. And I think if entertainment is great, but you can't get entertained, 24 hours a day or 18 hours a day. So I think that journey, when somebody's amazing is available for some time, you end up over consuming that. I think that's what I believe has happened with video. I think audio will be sustaining for a longer run. People are already looking for a break from screens over the last couple of years out there. People are already looking for a balance. That there are situations of mental wellness and mental challenges people are facing because of too much stress and so on. Those are not necessarily consumed or eradicated by watching more of video, or more of this thing. Yeah. But whereas if you listen to a soothing music, or if you are listening to a nice podcast where you can gain some, fundamental, traits on mindfulness and so on, I think just eases yourself up and so on. So I think we have seen that there's already a trend happening on moving from video to audio. And there's no competition here. It's just that it's a balance which is kind of a setting up. I mean, we believe, I myself love video a lot, so it's not that I think we're competing with video or something. It just is a balance which needs to be maintained, and that balance tilt is shifting now to audio in the longer run. And there, I think we have seen that there is this creator revolution which is going to happen. And there, I think Spotify is luckily at the cusp of that kind of a growth, because we entered into podcast about 3 years in a big way. We picked up great content companies. We are building content ourselves, but we also invested in a platform which is Anchor, which basically allows people to create podcasts. So now anybody and everybody can create podcasts, and they can express their thoughts earlier. So it's what you know and what you think, you can kind of really communicate so well and so fast, and in a do-it-yourself format, which, as Indians, we are not really clued to earlier, is actually going to change the way, creation of podcast or creation of audio will kind of start happening. And with that happening, also at Spotify, we are quite focused ourselves. If you look at the most work that we did last year, one of the two things that we did was focus on the creator part of it, help connect with them, understand their needs, connect them with the platforms that we have, whether it is Spotify for Artists or whether it's Anchor and so on. We're also now running programs on the grounds up, I think, in terms of, for example, in the grassroots level, we realize that there is not much diversity in India, because there are a lot of male singers, male voices out there, but a lot of underrepresentation of female voices. So we launched programs which basically, there's an amazing program we are running in India locally, which is called Amplify Her, which is our own local program conceived locally here. And the idea is to bring women voices out there and bring them up and, promote them. And this piece is going very well. We have our global programs also called Sound Up, which is for podcast, Equal, which is for music overall. And these two programs have linked in with this local program out there. And we believe that over the next few years, we will make sure that a lot of women voices come across and kind of get heard. So these are the kind of programs which we have been working on very early. Like, it's just been 3 years, but you see, we're already onto that job. We are also taking artists globally. I mean, with our programs, like upcoming programs, like Radar India is one of them, where we're promoting upcoming artists. We have introduced a new playlist called Fresh Finds, which is like literally finding the immediate talent which is just heard and just come out of the thing. Nobody has heard of them, picking them up and putting them in a playlist and putting them in a program where they get noticed. And through that, we have seen that people emerging out now, I think, from the Radar program. And we made a Spotify single for a very nice song, Rata Lambiya, along with Sony Music. And one of the singers in that was Hanita Bambri, who was a Radar singer. And, she became even more popular after that because growth happened. Abhilasha who was in Radar India, was on Times Square and so on and so on. So there's such amazing stories coming out of where we are really, but we know that we can't do everything overnight. So we are taking our steps, and these steps, I hope, will have a compounding effect as we go along. And I strongly believe that in the long run, I think the audio story in India is looking very, very strong. A lot of work to be done, and that's why we believe that we are in a good place right now, because we have done the work in the beginning, set the foundation. Now building the first couple of stories of the building and so on, and hopefully we'll keep growing that.
That's amazing, and especially the Abhilasha story and stories like that are so powerful. And also what Anchor has done for the podcasting ecosystem, and I think all of these is what adds up to that cultural icon thing that we were talking about, right? And I also completely with you, Amar, on what you said about audio versus video. I wanted to give you an anecdote, which is, my most favorite podcast from India is actually Mission ISRO, right? One of the earliest Spotify originals. That was so powerful. And, today I remember different aspects of what I listened to many, many months back, probably more than a year back. And it's funny when I see the recent video representation of that in a popular OTT platform, which is Rocket Boys. No disrespect to that great series, but to me, I remember what I listened to in audio more than the episodes I saw last week. So completely with you on that.
And can I share you something interesting?
Please.
The Rocket Boy, when they were making that serial, the research they were doing they were using Mission ISRO in that as a part of the
Absolutely.
research. So that's something that, see, so that's also one of the things which we are very, 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 I'm actually personally very proud of the team. I think that is working on such things because we came in early. Nobody has made some, local podcasts from that angle. I think they're very nice podcasts already there, like yours. But somebody who had not thought about creating stories out of, such real stories. And I think this is India's pride. I mean, to go to the space and so on. So I think, and having Harsha Bogle narrate it, was even more, interesting. So I think I agree with it. So very nice stuff coming from the stables. We have created about 150, podcasts, originals, exclusives by now. So looking forward to do more of those. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. And I'm not at the least surprised that they used the podcast for the research. But we usually end the episode by asking our guest what he or she is watching, reading, or listening to these days. Any content recommendations for those listening to this episode? Whether it's a book or a movie, something you're watching, or a show you're listening to.
Yeah, I'm actually I read 10 books at a time, so I'm not one of those guys.
Are you serious?
I open many books. I mean, not that I don't know if it's a good habit or bad habit, but I have a tendency to read non-fiction. So I kind of like to read stuff and then learn from it sometime and pick up something interesting. So I think if I have to remember which books I'm reading, so I think one of them is actually by Ryan Holiday's Obstacle is a Way. So I think so apt because I think I just read his book by the same author, which is very good, which is Ego is the Enemy. I think all of us need to continuously, keep fighting. One of the things we have to keep fighting is our own ego. I was, sometime back, I was reading this, I think Mahatma Gandhi had somebody quoted that one of the best things which I think I've ever heard as a quote, that, what is the core thing that you should do? I think you should reduce yourself into nothingness. And I think that piece, and this is Mahatma Gandhi's some quote from Africa, which I think was found in this thing. So you pick up some, great stuff from people. I think you have to learn. Obstacle is a Way is interesting because it's kind of I think we are facing obstacles we've never seen in our life before. And, every week, every month, we wake up with a new challenge that we see in front of us. So I think that's great. But I'm reading so many books, so I think I can't, may not be able to top of mind recall it. But these are a couple of ones I'm reading. Then on the podcast side of it, I think there are some. I just heard Arnold Schwarzenegger's podcast yesterday. This is a Tim Ferriss one, which is very nice. I loved it.
Yes.
It is about his journey, and it was about journey. But I actually listened to a lot of podcasts nowadays on investment and other stuff to understand what's happening, Web3 and NFTs and so on, which is, you find so much. But the one which I really, really liked recently was about some historical one, which was about, I was trying to understand this. How do these people think? And I don't want to quote names out here because these are, the leaders, world leaders who do these crazy things, like invade and attack and so on. And I think there is a podcast called How to Take Over the World, which is and he covers some very interesting, people, across from Julius Caesar to Napoleon and of course, so he actually covered some very interesting things you learn. I mean, then you realize that there are stories about people who tried to do that. But my learning is that one of the things which we should all keep is that there are a lot of people who think they can change the world. But in the end of it, in the end, what happens in the end is that most of them are forgotten. So the real life is that you have to keep going, do something of kindness. I think strongly, I believe in that culture. I think Spotify, also does, believes in the same values. Do something which is nice to the world, or go out there and do some work of kindness. Because in the end of it, that's what is remembered. I think that's what is remembered, and that's what, you are here for. So I believe I would like to end with that and say that let's all kind of, in this crazy world out there, let's wake up and, do something good. And I hope we can all inspire to do that.
Wonderful. What a great way to end this. Amar, thank you so much for your time. I know time is not easy for you to take out, but we're really, really grateful for you to have done this. And good luck with everything that you're trying to achieve at Spotify.
Thank you, Karthik. Thank you. It was a pleasure to have a chat with you, and look forward to another one sometime later.
Thank you so much. So that was our show this week. I hope you liked it. And if you did, and if you're a fan of the show, Hey, I have something to ask of you. If you are listening to the show on Spotify or Apple right now, please do rate us on the respective app. It helps a lot in others discovering the show. And if you have any feedback on the show, I would love to hear from you. You can send it to filtercoffeepodcast@gmail.com. Happy listening and see you next week with another episode.
Do you wonder why China does the things that it does? Or want to know how we could improve online privacy? Or perhaps you're thinking about how we can kickstart India's economy. If you'd like to search for the answers to such questions, check out All Things Policy, a daily public policy podcast that covers everything from employment figures to aircraft carriers. Tune in from Monday to Friday for new episodes and fresh takes.
Love fighting?
We've got you covered.
Check out our show, The Fighting Goat, where we, the voices of the internet, Arjun Chipalkatti and Somesh Kamra, bring to you crazy weekly action on your favorite combat show, The Fighting Goat.
Be it commentary, breakdown, predictions, analysis of styles and techniques.
And of course, your round of favorite fighters.
You can listen to us every Thursday on the IVM Podcast app, website, and all major podcast streaming platforms.